My morning started with the slow creak of the porch screen door, the hiss of the old coffee pot, and the far-off hum of cicadas still clinging to the last breath of summer. For most people, this place, these 47 acres tucked behind the hills of Wilton Ridge, was just open land, a few red barns, a rusted tractor or two. But for me, it was more than property. It was my inheritance, my anchor, and my way back to something simple after too many years away. Most of the neighbors knew me as just Ben. Mid-40s, quiet, always in boots with a dog named Lucky, who rarely left my side. No one asked where I'd come from. No one knew about the Bureau of Land Management credentials tucked in the back of my gun safe, or the 14 years I spent overseeing some of the most disputed parcels of public land in the state. And that's how I liked it. Out here, I didn't have to wear a badge. I didn't have to enforce, argue, or draw lines. I could just be a man with soil on his palms and sweat in his shirt. The farm had belonged to my grandfather, then my mother, and finally to me, after her funeral 2 years ago. She left it to me with one final request. Don't let them pave it over Ben. This land raised generations. I promised her I wouldn't, and I meant it. The HOA that governed Wilton Ridge was one of those entities that had started with good intentions, neat fences, quiet streets, safety for kids, and mutated into a kind of shadow government run by power-hungry volunteers who thought managing flower beds gave them authority over lives. Luckily, most of their reach ended at the edge of my property. Legally, my farmland was zoned separately, grandfathered in, before the HOA even existed. They couldn't touch me, or so I thought. The first months after moving in full-time were peaceful. I fixed up the fencing, planted some cover crops, and spent most days clearing old brush or patching irrigation. At night, I'd sit on the porch with a whiskey glass, and Lucky curled at my feet listening to the wind roll across the fields. But something shifted in the spring of last year. It started small. A clipboard-wielding man showed up one morning, pacing along my fence line, like he was measuring something. When I called out, he didn't answer, just got in his car and drove off. A few days later, bright orange survey flags appeared at the western edge of my land, near the cottonwood grove that marked the old creek bed. I pulled them up and tossed them in a bucket. The next week, they were back, twice as many. That same afternoon, I saw a drone hover for a full 10 minutes above my pasture before vanishing into the clouds. Still, I tried to stay calm. Maybe the county was rerouting something. Maybe it was just a mistake. Then came the letter. Typed, no return address, it was stuffed in my mailbox without postage. Dear resident, it read, this notice is to inform you that Wilton Ridge, HOA, has entered a planning phase for a luxury condominium development to enhance community value. Preliminary surveys have begun. Your cooperation is appreciated. It didn't make sense. I wasn't part of their HOA. My deed, which I had copies of in a fireproof cabinet, and digitally archived twice over, clearly outlined the parcel boundaries. The HOA had no jurisdiction on my side of the old fence line. I drove to the HOA office the next day. It was a tidy building at the center of the neighborhood, where they hosted bake sales and budget meetings. A receptionist looked me up and down, like I was a mechanic who wandered too far off the road. When I asked for the HOA president, a thin-lipped woman named Deborah Marks finally came out after 15 minutes. She smiled the kind of smile you give a child who doesn't know better. Mr. Coleman, she said, glancing at a clipboard as if confirming who I was. We've been meaning to speak with you. Then maybe you should have knocked on my door instead of surveying my fields. She blinked slowly. It's all part of the neighborhood enhancement plan. The community voted to expand our housing options. You're part of that plan. No, I'm not. I'm not under your jurisdiction. Well, she said, flipping through her papers, we were advised by a consultant that your plot falls within the extended boundary, and the land hasn't been actively farmed in years, which suggests abandonment. I laughed once, sharp and bitter. That's not how property rights work, and if you think I don't know the law... Oh, we have legal counsel, she interrupted, raising her eyebrows. Like that settled it. I left without another word. Not because I was defeated, but because I recognized the play. Bullies in pastel sweaters and HOA polos were still bullies. I dealt with land disputes involving ranchers oil companies, conservationists, and even armed standoffs. This was just arrogance in cul-de-sac form. But that night, I couldn't sleep. Something told me they weren't bluffing. So I pulled out the old file cabinet and found the original land grant my grandfather secured in 1957. I printed fresh copies of the federal easement, the zoning records, the municipal exclusion orders. I even called in a favor from an old BLM colleague named Terry, now working in Washington. "You want me to flag this through state-level permits?" he asked over the phone. "Not yet," I said. "But keep an eye out for anything labeled Wilton Ridge." A week later, I saw the first backhoe roll up to the edge of my pasture. I didn't stop them, not yet. I wanted them to cross the line. Because once they did, once they set a single foundation peg into soil, they didn't own everything changed. The morning after the backhoe incident, I walked to the western edge of my property before sunrise. Dew still clung to the tall grass, and the fields were quiet, save for the low whir of distant equipment. There was a new line of markers, plastic stakes with neon tape fluttering in the breeze, stretching across the north ridge like stitches through wounded earth. They hadn't even bothered to hide them this time. I crouched and yanked one from the ground. It was marked with coordinates, surveyor codes, and the letters WRD, Wilton Ridge Development. My gut clenched. They were drawing lines across my land like it was theirs. I stood there for a while, the flag in my hand, thinking about my mother's voice, "Don't let them pave it over." Then I saw a white SUV idling just outside the gate. A man in slacks and a collared shirt stood beside it, arms crossed, watching me like a hawk. He didn't wave, didn't approach, just stood there silent and entitled. I'd seen his type before. They showed up on government rangeland all the time, pretending they didn't know where the boundary ended, always trying to stretch a little further. In those days, I had the badge to stop them. Out here, I was still a civilian, but only on paper. By late morning, trucks started arriving. First one, then another. They were marked with the logo of Southside Development Group, a builder I vaguely recognized from a news story about a sinkhole collapse near Kingsborough. The men inside wore vests and hard hats and acted like they owned the place. I asked who sent them. One of them chuckled. "We got orders from Wilton Ridge HOA," he said. "They said this area's been cleared." "It hasn't," I replied. "This is private farmland. Mine." "Then you better take it up with your HOA, bud," he said, brushing past me like I was just a curious neighbor and not the actual landowner. I took pictures of the trucks, the plates, the company logos. I photographed every new flag and staked marker, then sent the photos to Terry with a single line they crossed. That night, I called the county assessor's office. The woman on the phone, Jeanette, sounded sympathetic until she asked for my address. Then her tone changed. "Oh, you're in Wilton Ridge. This must be part of the new initiative. We've already filed the plan amendments." "What amendments?" I asked, sitting forward in my chair. There was a rezoning motion passed last month. Some rural lots on the edge of Wilton were updated to reflect multi-use residential. Without notifying the owners, I can't speak to that, sir. The next morning, I drove down to City Hall. I brought every document I had, the deed survey maps, old zoning records, and the property tax history that proved my continued use and care of the land. At the planning office, a man named Curtis met me with a grin that was too polished to be sincere. "Mr. Coleman," he said, flipping through the file I'd handed him, "I can see this is important to you." "No," I said, leveling my voice. "It's not about feelings. This is about federal land records. The parcel is not part of Wilton Ridge. It never was. I have pre-HOA zoning protection under the Agricultural Legacy Act." Curtis looked uncomfortable. "That's something we can look into." But the HOA submitted a development proposal with a map that includes... "They forged it," I said, cutting him off. "Or worse, someone in your office is complicit." His smile faltered. "Mr. Coleman, accusations like that, I'll make them official if this isn't reversed immediately." When I walked out, I wasn't just angry. I was determined. That evening, I drove out to the field again just before dusk. I needed to see how far they'd gone. What I found made my blood run cold. They had already started laying the gravel foundation for a private access road. It cut directly across my pasture and into the north slope, destroying nearly an acre of crops I had planted months earlier. I counted 3 concrete mixer trucks parked along the edge, engines silent, ready for the next day's pour. There were spotlights installed on temporary rigs, security cameras now pointed inward from my land toward me. I couldn't believe the arrogance. No cease and desist, no purchase offer, no hearing. Just a quiet, arrogant land grab backed by HOA signatures and slick paper maps. Lucky barked suddenly and darted toward the south fence. I turned and saw a black sedan slowly pulling away. It had been watching me. The HOA wasn't just ignoring the law. They were watching, planning, and likely expecting me to fold. Maybe they thought I'd be too tired, too alone, too far from any legal support to push back. But they didn't know who I was. That night, I pulled the BLM folder from the safe. It wasn't much a badge, some retired federal ID, and a copy of the Land Management Interagency Handbook. I hadn't touched it in years, but it was still valid. I still had connections, even if I didn't carry the badge anymore. I placed the badge on the table beside my whiskey glass and stared at it for a long while. It was time to stop playing neighbor. I woke to the low mechanical groan of diesel engines, 3 of them, before the sun even crested the ridge. Lucky was already up, pacing nervously at the door, growling in short bursts. When I stepped outside, the air smelled like wet soil and exhaust. And there they were, bulldozers, big ones, not the kind used for road maintenance or landscaping. These were construction-grade, land-devouring machines. They sat idling at the edge of the pasture I had spent the last 6 months nursing back to life. And behind them, like generals observing a siege, stood 3 men in safety vests holding clipboards, talking among themselves like they owned every inch of it. I walked down the hill with purpose. The grass was damp and my boots left prints in the earth with every step. Lucky followed close, tail down, ears alert. "Morning," I called out, loud and flat. One of the men turned tall, smug, with wraparound sunglasses, despite the early hour. "Hey there," he replied casually, like we were neighbors discussing fence paint. "This is private property," I said, gesturing at the field. "You're trespassing. Turn those machines around." He barely looked at me. "We're operating under directive from Wilton Ridge HOA. Development starts this week. Your area was annexed. I didn't sign anything. I wasn't notified. And more importantly, your map is wrong." Now he did look at me. "Sir, I'm not paid to debate property law. If you have a complaint, file it with the HOA. We have permits. If you interfere, that's trespassing on our end." That was the moment. That flicker of bait and switch. The confidence that comes when a man thinks you're powerless. I'd seen it before, usually from bureaucrats in expensive suits who thought rural meant uneducated. They looked at boots and calloused hands and assumed weakness. I took a long breath. "You're building on land you don't own. You're destroying legally registered farmland. 1 more inch forward, and I'll take that to court, press charges, and issue a stop order through federal channels." That got a laugh. "What, you got a cousin in code enforcement?" I stared him down for a beat too long. Then I said, calm and clear, "No. But I do have jurisdiction." And I turned around. They didn't follow. Not yet. They didn't know what I meant. But that phrase, "I do have jurisdiction," would echo back at them soon enough. Back at the house, I pulled out the folder again. This time, I included copies of the 1963 Federal Zoning Easement, the BLM's Classified Soil Quality Map, which would make the land ineligible for any residential development due to a fragile water table, and a copy of an old agreement my grandfather had signed, one that granted BLM federal oversight on any land use conversion for 99 years. It was bulletproof. I spent the rest of the morning emailing contacts, some still in BLM, others now in the Department of the Interior. Most were retired, but they owed me favors. I'd pulled some of them out of political fires years ago during disputes in Navajo country or oil conflicts up north. By midday, I'd submitted 3 formal complaints: an environmental violation, an unauthorized construction report on federally protected land, a request for immediate federal inspection based on suspected zoning fraud. I wasn't bluffing anymore. But Wilton Ridge didn't wait either. That afternoon, a uniformed officer showed up at my gate. Not county, Not sheriff, private. The patch on his shoulder said Wilton Ridge, Enforcement, a glorified security company in a tactical vest. He claimed he was there to issue me a warning for obstruction of HOA development. I stared at the document he handed me. It was typed on HOA letterhead, full of false claims about me damaging community resources and interfering with approved municipal construction. I didn't say a word. I just took out my phone and snapped his photo with the document in his hand. "You're impersonating an officer," I said flatly. "And you're trespassing." "I've been authorized. You've been conned," I interrupted. "Leave, now." He did. Not because I was intimidating, but because somewhere in his eyes he saw it. I wasn't bluffing, and something was coming. But the real betrayal came that evening. I got a call from Terry. His voice was tight. "Ben, I flagged the parcel," and he sighed. The HOA's lawyer filed a backdated land use application. Claims they purchased development rights from the county 6 months ago. They didn't. I know, but the paperwork looks polished, like someone high up pushed it through quietly. It'll take time to unwind. How much time more than we have if they start pouring concrete? You need to stall. I walked back outside and stared at the distant field. The sun was setting behind the ridge, casting long shadows across the property. The bulldozers hadn't moved yet, but they were still there, waiting. So I made a choice. That night, I camped out by the southern tree line hidden behind the tractor shed. I had a camera, a flashlight, a thermos of coffee, and a long-lost sense of purpose humming in my chest. Around 3 a.m., a crew showed up. Not worker suits. 3 people in dress clothes, 2 men, and a woman. They walked the property line with clipboards and lasers measuring, talking in low tones. I filmed everything. They didn't know I was 10 feet away, crouched in the dark behind an old cedar. And when one of them pulled out a blueprint and muttered, "He doesn't know how far this goes," I smiled. Oh, but I did. I knew exactly how far it would go, and I was going to make sure it went no further. I didn't sleep after that night in the cedar line. By sunrise, I had transferred the footage from my camera to 3 separate flash drives, one in my lockbox, one in my truck, and one hidden inside an empty coffee can buried beneath the rosebush beside the front porch. Years in federal land enforcement had taught me one rule above all: when people are willing to steal land in the dark, they're willing to do a whole lot worse in daylight. Around 8:15 a.m., a knock came at the door. Not a gentle, neighborly tap. 3 sharp raps, authoritative. I opened it to find Deborah Marks, the HOA president, standing between 2 men in matching blue blazers and khakis. Her lipstick was perfect, her posture stiff with confidence. She held a manila envelope like it was a sword. "Mr. Coleman," she said, voice sickly sweet. "We're here to discuss your recent interference in community development." I let the silence hang between us. "We'd like to come in and resolve this amicably." She continued, "No." She blinked. "Excuse me, I don't allow trespassers inside my home." Her mouth flattened into a line. "This is a matter of public interest. This is my home, my land. You've crossed the line, literally and legally." One of the men stepped forward. "Mr. Coleman, we're representing Wilton Ridge's Planning Advisory Subcommittee. This project has the full endorsement of the Homeowners Board with zoning approval at the municipal level." "I'm not a member of your HOA," I said, "and your subcommittee is about as legal as a lemonade stand in a parking lot." Deborah's smile disappeared completely now. She thrust the envelope toward me. "This is a formal notice of annexation and a demand to cease all obstruction or face civil penalties." I didn't take it. "Leave it on the porch," I said. "You're making a mistake," she warned. We tried the polite way. I leaned in just enough that they'd have to lean back. "Ma'am, I've dealt with sovereign land disputes in Utah that were more civil than this HOA circus. You're lucky all I've done is film you." They left. But they didn't go quietly. Within an hour, HOA volunteers swarmed the road leading up to my gate. They hammered in signs that read, "Future site of Ridgeview Terrace, a Wilton Ridge community expansion." Banners were rolled out across my fence, blocking the view of my field. They planted little pink and blue flags in the dirt, like it was a gender reveal party for a crime. Worse, they started handing out flyers to passersby and joggers: "Support growth. Say yes to affordable condos." The irony made my stomach turn. These condos were luxury units, nothing affordable about them. This wasn't about housing. It was about power, profit, and the illusion of community pride. I took photos of everything. That evening, I called Terry again. "They're escalating," I saw. That annexation notice, sloppy. Legally worthless, but it might confuse the county long enough for them to get concrete poured. So what do? You need to stop the pour. Once foundation is down, it becomes a different legal battle. But if you prevent them from breaking ground, you still have jurisdiction through environmental oversight and zoning fraud. Understood. And Ben, yeah. Time to flash the badge. I hung up. Then I went into the house, retrieved the leather case from the drawer beneath my grandfather's old war medals, and opened it. The badge was still polished, still heavy in the hand, federal issue. Bureau of Land Management. Retired status or not, it carried weight. The next day, I put on a clean shirt, boots, and my old field vest. I slid the badge into the front pocket where it used to rest during inspections. Not for show, but for authority. Then I drove down to the HOA office. It was mid-morning. The place bustled with committee members and local retirees playing politics with their coffee. I walked past them all, pushed through the conference room door without knocking, and found Deborah seated at the head of the table going over blueprints with the same two men from yesterday. They froze. "Mr. Coleman," she said, recovering quickly. "You're not allowed in here without an appointment." I pulled the badge from my pocket and set it on the table in front of her. The room went silent. "I'm here on federal business," I said. "As of this moment, your development project is under investigation for zoning fraud, unlawful trespass, and potential environmental violations under BLM Title 43 protocols." One of the men reached for the badge like he didn't believe it was real. I slapped my hand down over it. "Don't." Deborah paled. "This is absurd," she said weakly. "You're just a landowner." I was quiet because I respected the community, I said. "But now I'm acting because you've disrespected the law. BLM doesn't oversee private property. You built on protected soil. You filed altered maps. You bypassed required hearings. And you're now being flagged for emergency audit by both the Department of the Interior and the Federal Inspector General." They didn't speak, not because they believed me yet, but because they didn't know what else I had. I stood, retrieved the badge, and looked at Deborah. "This isn't over," she whispered. "No," I replied. "It's just beginning." On my way out, I passed by a community bulletin board and yanked down one of the flyers that read, "Support Progress. Build Ridgeview." I scribbled across it with a pen. Progress doesn't mean theft, and I left it pinned right back up. The next morning, I left Lucky with the neighbor's kid and drove straight to the county building 10 miles south in Langston. The sun hadn't even broken through the haze yet, but I needed to be the first person in line at the zoning office. I couldn't rely on the BLM badge alone, not when the local government had already shown signs of being pulled into the HOA's orbit. I needed to cut off their supply of false legitimacy, and that meant rooting it out at the source. The building hadn't changed much since I was a boy. Beige stucco and American flag that fluttered half-heartedly in the wind, and a parking lot full of white sedans. Inside, the walls smelled like coffee and dust, and the carpet was a faded brown with curled edges. The zoning department was on the third floor behind a plexiglass window and a secretary who looked like she hated every part of her job. I stepped up to the counter and said, "I'm here to review any permit applications, variances, or land use modifications filed for parcel 31876B Wilton Ridge Township." She raised an eyebrow. "You got written authorization. I'm the owner." She looked me over, skeptical. But after a few more questions and a glance at my driver's license, she disappeared behind a door. When she returned, she carried a thick folder in one hand and a nervous look on her face. "I don't know what you're involved in," she said quietly, "but there's a lot here. Too much, actually." She slid the folder across the desk and buzzed me into the records room. I sat at the long, battered table and began reading. My hands shook after page 7. It wasn't just that the HOA had filed a permit to build. It was that they had attached a copy of a sale agreement for my land. A fake deed, notarized in another county, showing that I had transferred development rights to the Wilton Ridge Homeowners Association in exchange for a community equity stake. There was even a forged signature. Mine. I stared at it, bile rising in my throat. They had faked a legal document, filed it with the county, and used it to secure a development variance allowing condo construction to begin before the zoning board could complete its annual review. This wasn't some overreach or clerical error. This was fraud. And someone inside this building had signed off on it. I looked up at the clock. It was just after 10 a.m. The zoning board chair usually came in on Thursdays. I took the folder with me and walked straight into the main office. The receptionist didn't even try to stop me. I found the zoning commissioner, Marvin Bright, in his corner office. Late 50s pressed shirt, thinning hair, and a framed certificate behind him that said, "Serving our county with pride." He looked up as I entered. "Can I help you?" he asked, too polite, too quickly. "You approved a fraudulent land use transfer," I said, tossing the folder onto his desk. He blinked. "Excuse me, that's my land. This document claims I sold it. That signature isn't mine, and you signed the approval based on it." He opened the folder, flipped through a few pages, and the color drained from his face. I don't remember signing this," he said. "You did. On March 3rd, page 14. He turned to the page. Then he went very still. "I thought this was part of a bulk adjustment submission," he muttered. The HOA submitted a package of parcels, said everything had been approved and verified. We were backlogged. We trusted the legal team's review. I slammed my hand on the desk hard enough to make him jump. "You signed off on a theft, Marvin. That's not a clerical mistake. That's complicity." He looked up at me, panicked. I can fix this. You're going to do more than fix it. You're going to issue a stay order. Immediately. Freeze the permit. Mark the file under review pending federal investigation. And you're going to write a letter stating that the authenticity of the development rights is now in question. I'll have to talk to legal. No, I cut him off. You'll do it now, or I'm taking this straight to the Inspector General and the press. We stared at each other for a long moment. Then he reached for his phone. An hour later, I walked out of that building with a signed stop work order in my hand and copies of every document from the fraudulent file, including the forged deed. I also had an internal memo from Marvin stating that the zoning board had been misled by incomplete and potentially falsified documentation submitted by third-party representatives of Wilton Ridge HOA. I scanned the document, uploaded it to a cloud drive, and sent a copy to Terry with the subject line, "Now we're in business." I should have felt triumphant, but I didn't. Not yet. Because on the way home, I saw a new sign posted at the end of my road. It read, "Condos coming soon, pre-construction tours this weekend." They weren't backing down. They were doubling down. I parked my truck, grabbed the stop order, and walked the entire field perimeter, hammering copies onto every tree and stake. I stapled one to the developer's gravel sign, another to the makeshift banner still hanging on my fence. Then I climbed onto the old flatbed trailer by the shed, pulled out my phone, and hit record. I filmed myself holding the stop order in one hand and the BLM badge in the other. Then I said, "My name is Benjamin Coleman. I am the legal owner of this land. The HOA of Wilton Ridge has forged documents, trespassed, and attempted to develop on federally protected agricultural property. As of today, construction is halted by county order. Any further intrusion will be considered unlawful, and I will pursue every legal avenue until justice is done. This is not just about property. It's about the truth, and I won't be silent." I posted the video to 3 platforms, tagged every HOA watchdog group I could find, and sent it to a local news reporter I'd met once during a wildfire response years ago. By nightfall, the video had over 10,000 views, and the phone started ringing. Neighbors, reporters, even a young woman from the environmental science department at the university asking if she could bring students to help assess the damage. People were watching now. The quiet man on the edge of town wasn't invisible anymore, and the HOA had just stepped into the light. I didn't sleep that night, not because I was afraid, but because adrenaline had made a home in my blood, and I couldn't quiet the feeling that something was about to crack wide open. When the sun crept over the hills and painted gold across the pasture, I stood on my porch, coffee in hand, watching as a black SUV rolled up and parked just beyond the fence line. 2 men got out. Both wore suits that looked more fitted for courtroom showdowns than for dirt roads. They didn't wave, didn't smile, just opened the back door and out stepped Deborah Marks. Her lipstick was red this time, power red. She didn't ask to come in, just walked up the path with the confidence of someone who still believed she had the upper hand. I didn't move. I wanted her to speak first. "Mr. Coleman," she said, voice carefully composed, "we've seen your video." I raised my eyebrows. "You'll be seeing a lot more soon." She gestured toward the stop order stapled to the corner fence. "I'm here to discuss this. I believe we can reach an agreement before things become public spectacle." "Oh, it's already public. You made it that way when you built a road through my field without permission. That's a misunderstanding." "No," I said. "Forgery is not a misunderstanding. It's a felony." The taller man behind her cleared his throat and stepped forward. "Mr. Coleman, I'm Patrick Reese, legal counsel for the Wilton Ridge Homeowners Association. There seems to have been an error in deed processing, don't I?" interrupted. "Don't gaslight me with bureaucratic euphemisms. You filed a forged deed to justify illegal development. I have the proof. The county knows, the media's watching, and the feds are about to take a hard look at every permit you've ever touched." Reese adjusted his tie. "We are prepared to offer a generous compensation package in exchange for a formal retraction and release of claim. Full market value plus damages." I laughed, not out of humor, out of disbelief. "You want to buy me off?" "We're trying to resolve this peacefully. You built on my land, lied about it, sent fake cops to my door. And now you're standing here offering a payout like this is some kind of land dispute from a Western film." I stepped off the porch and pulled the badge from my pocket. I held it up right at Deborah's eye level. "This is who I am," I said. "Benjamin Coleman. Bureau of Land Management, retired but still credentialed, still protected, and still damn well informed." She said nothing. I went on. "I've spent 20 years enforcing land rights across 3 states. I've stopped mining companies, logging contractors, and million-dollar developers. Do you really think your HOA's bake sale budget and forged papers are going to scare me?" The shorter man, the one with a bald spot and trembling hands, shifted uncomfortably behind her. Reese tried to speak again, but I didn't let him. "You made a mistake. You thought I was just some hillbilly with a dog and a tractor. But you never checked who I really was. You didn't think anyone would push back. And now you're standing on federal jurisdiction." Deborah finally spoke, her voice quieter this time. "You don't have to escalate this, Ben. You already did." Then I pointed, "Now get the hell off my land." They turned without another word and left. Not because they wanted to, but because something in my eyes told them I wasn't bluffing. And for the first time, they believed me. An hour later, I got a call from the local Channel 4 reporter, Carla Nguyen. "Is this Mr. Coleman?" she asked. "Yes, I've seen your footage. I want to come out film a segment for Sunday's feature. The public needs to see this. Come ahead." By mid-afternoon, I was standing beside my barn mic'd up with the wind whipping my collar and cameras rolling. Carla asked real questions, the kind people never asked until it was too late. She walked the property with me, shot B-roll of the ripped-up field, the concrete dust still clinging to the soil, the flags pushed down into sacred dirt. When she asked me why I didn't speak out sooner, I looked into the camera and said, "Because I thought I could handle it quietly." But they didn't just try to steal land. They tried to erase legacy. And I won't let that happen. That night, the HOA called for an emergency board meeting. It was held in the community center gymnasium. The place was packed, rows of metal chairs, angry murmurs bouncing off the walls. Some residents were confused. Others were furious. A few even looked scared. I arrived uninvited and sat in the back wearing my field vest and boots with a copy of the forged deed in one hand and a printed photo of the bulldozers tearing through my pasture in the other. When Deborah walked to the podium, the room quieted. She began her usual speech: community values, growth, investment, future planning. But then someone shouted, "You lied to us!" Another voice followed. "Did you really build on land you don't own?" The room swelled with unease. That's when I stood. I didn't walk to the front. I didn't raise my voice. I just held up the deed. "This is a fake," I said. "Submitted by your leadership. Signed with a forged version of my name. Used to take land that belonged to my family for 3 generations. This is not progress. It's theft." Gasps, silence, murmurs. Reese tried to interject legalese, but someone shouted him down. Deborah's hands gripped the podium so hard her knuckles turned white. Then a man in the front row stood, gray beard, flannel shirt. "I've lived here 20 years, he said. "Built my porch with my own hands. I joined this HOA to keep our neighborhood clean, not to steal from folks." One by one others stood. A woman clutching her daughter's hand. A retired teacher. A couple who just moved in last year. They didn't all support me, but they didn't support what the HOA had become either. The meeting fell apart after that. And I left before the shouting turned into a vote. Back home, I sat on this porch with Lucky the stars overhead, and the badge still heavy in my pocket. I had exposed them. Now, I just needed to finish what I started. By the next morning, the story had made it to every local news outlet in the Tri-County area. Carla Nguyen's segment aired just after the Sunday church hour, and it spread like wildfire through Facebook groups, Reddit threads, and HOA watchdog blogs. The headline read, "HOA accused of land grab using forged deed. Former federal officer speaks out." The HOA tried to push back, releasing a generic statement about miscommunication, clerical inconsistencies, and ongoing internal reviews, but it only fanned the flames. You can't put a Band-Aid on a wildfire, especially not when the fire's fueled by arrogance and exposure. On Monday morning, I received a call from a woman named Valerie Torres. She was from the Office of the Inspector General for the Department of the Interior, and she didn't waste time. "Mr. Coleman, we've received documentation from your office, as well as the Langston Zoning Board. We've also reviewed the footage of your property and the alleged development activity." "Alleged?" I asked. There was a pause. Then I'm being polite. "What we're seeing is deeply concerning. I'm dispatching a field investigator today. We'd like to begin an official review of all permits related to Wilton Ridge HOA and the Southside Development Group." I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," she said. "They're going to come after you harder now. Be ready." And they did. By noon, I got an email from someone named Blake Maddox, an HOA-appointed attorney from a firm in the Capitol with the kind of letterhead that smelled like $600 billable hours. It was a cease and desist order. They were threatening to sue me for defamation. I laughed when I read it, then sent it straight to Terry. 2 hours later, he responded with a PDF attachment and a one-line message. "Your counter just became federal." The attachment was a formal federal notice of pending investigation served to Wilton Ridge HOA and Southside Development Group, citing Title 43, CFR 1610.53b. Unauthorized land use on federally classified parcels with a pending environmental review under NEPA. For the first time in weeks, I let myself feel something close to hope, until I heard the pounding at my door. It wasn't a knock, it was a bang. 2 uniformed men, this time from Langston County Sheriff's Office, stood outside with stern faces and tension in their shoulders. "Mr. Coleman," one of them asked, "we have a report of hostile threats made against HOA board members." I blinked. "What?" He pulled a tablet from his vest. "According to their sworn statements, you made verbal threats of violence during the board meeting Saturday night." I looked between the 2 officers, trying to read whether they believed any of this. I stood up. I spoke the truth. I never threatened anyone. The taller one nodded slowly. "Mind if we come in and talk?" I stepped aside. They asked their questions. I showed them the video of the meeting, which had been streamed online by a concerned resident. It showed me standing, speaking calmly, presenting the deed. It showed the crowd reacting, the tension, the collapse of trust, but no threats, no violence, just facts. When they left, one of them shook my hand. "Looks like they're throwing everything they've got at you," he said quietly. "They haven't even begun." By Tuesday, the federal investigator arrived. Her name was Maura Jensen, early 40s, sharp eyes, and a badge that carried weight. She wore hiking boots instead of heels, carried a satchel filled with printed maps, and asked questions like someone who already knew the answers, but wanted to see how you'd react anyway. She spent 2 hours walking the land with me, inspecting soil conditions, comparing GIS data with the supposed development blueprints and marking points where the construction crews had already disturbed protected earth. "This is worse than I expected," she muttered at one point. "There are drainage patterns here that link directly to the watershed basin. What does that mean?" "It means they didn't just build illegally. They disrupted a federally monitored floodplain. That brings in the Army Corps of Engineers and EPA. And that," she said with a slight smile, "means big trouble." She spent the night in town. By Thursday, the Army Corps had arrived. 3 men in olive drab jackets and ball caps stood at my gate with clipboards and satellite printouts. One of them, a stoic guy named Hank, whistled low when he saw the extent of the disturbed area. "Looks like somebody's going to need more than an apology," he said. They marked the construction zone, took soil samples, and launched an emergency review to halt all building activity in the surrounding parcels. And then came the real hammer. That weekend, the State Environmental Agency declared a temporary development freeze on all HOA expansion projects in Wilton Ridge, pending investigation of fraud, environmental violations, and land encroachment. Deborah Marks was seen leaving the HOA office, with sunglasses on, ducking her head into her Mercedes. Reese, her legal mouthpiece, hadn't shown his face in days. And me, I stood at the edge of the field they'd tried to claim, now littered with abandoned equipment, halted progress, and torn plastic sheeting, fluttering like white flags, and I breathed. But I knew better than to relax, because people like Deborah, people like the Southside developers, don't go down quietly. And just because the heat was on didn't mean they wouldn't strike again. That night, I double-checked my locks, backed up my hard drives, and installed motion cameras on the perimeter. Then I took Lucky for a walk through the cottonwoods, the stars blinking overhead, the scent of damp earth rising from the soil they'd tried to steal. "Almost there, boy," I whispered. "Almost." I woke to the sound of silence. No diesel engines, no shouting crew bosses, no backup beeps. Just wind through the cottonwoods and Lucky's slow breath at the foot of my bed. For the first time in weeks, there was no movement on the western side of the property. The heavy machinery had disappeared overnight, like invaders retreating under cover of darkness. But I wasn't naive enough to believe it was over. After breakfast, I drove down to the HOA office, not to argue, not to shout, but to witness. A small crowd had gathered outside, their murmurs rising like a low tide. Neighbors in golf carts and yoga pants, retirees with dogs on leashes, and younger couples with confused looks in their eyes. Everyone staring at the closed doors of the once proud HOA headquarters. Taped across the glass was a federal notice, "Premises closed pending investigation. United States Department of the Interior." The crowd didn't cheer. They didn't clap. They just stood watching the building like it might come to life and explain itself. I parked across the street and stayed in the truck. I wasn't there to make a scene. But when one man pointed in my direction and others followed his gaze, I gave a small nod. Some nodded back. Others looked away. But none of them approached. The silence spoke volumes. By noon, the Langston Ledger ran a front-page story: Wilton Ridge HOA under federal probe, forged deeds, illegal construction, and environmental violations alleged. They'd spoken to residents who said they'd never seen the documents that supposedly authorized the condo build. Some HOA board members claimed ignorance. One even resigned live on a Zoom call, her voice shaking as she read a statement about being pressured to vote on packets she never fully reviewed. That same afternoon, Southside Development Group officially pulled out. They blamed unexpected regulatory hurdles and unforeseen legal complexities. But it was clear the permits were worthless, the land wasn't theirs, and the condo project was now radioactive. Still, the damage was done. The gravel path they'd cut through the field was still there now, riddled with tire ruts and erosion. The cottonwood grove bore the scars of machinery that never should have entered. One of the water channels had been altered by a bulldozer trench, and it would take weeks, maybe months, to undo the hydrology imbalance. But worse than the physical damage was the wound they'd opened in the community. Neighbors turned on each other. Some defended the HOA, claiming I had overreacted or gone federal too fast. Others said I was the only reason anyone even knew what was going on. At the grocery store, people either shook my hand or avoided my aisle entirely. I wasn't a neighbor anymore. I was the guy who blew the whistle. And that came with its own kind of isolation. Back on the land, I threw myself into work. I rented a backhoe and started restoring the slope they'd carved up. I hauled new soil, laid down mesh netting, and planted erosion control ryegrass to hold the top layer in place. Lucky watched from the shade tail thumping as if he knew every stroke of the shovel was a kind of healing. A few days later, a group of students from the local university showed up just like they'd promised. Led by a professor named Dr. Elena Bell, they arrived with notepads, drones, and environmental testing kits. Their goal was to document the damage and recommend a restoration plan. I never thought I'd be standing in the middle of a neighborhood dealing with a federal case, one student joked. It's not a neighborhood, I said. It's a battleground in disguise. We spent 2 full days walking the land, taking core samples, measuring water runoff, and flagging areas where invasive plants had started to sprout thanks to the disturbance. It was technical, exhausting, and oddly comforting. This was the language I knew. Not HOA bylaws, not board meetings, but land soil drainage and data. By the end of the week, Dr. Bell presented me with a 24-page environmental assessment and a grant proposal template. You qualify for post-violation restoration funds under the Clean Land Use Act, she explained. If approved, it could cover up to 80% of your costs. It felt like hope. Not victory, not yet, but the kind of quiet, sturdy hope you build foundations on. That Saturday, I attended a town hall meeting at Langston Community Center. It wasn't my usual scene, but the county had invited me to speak. I wore jeans, a button-down shirt, and carried only one thing, the original deed, yellowed and folded from decades in my family's filing cabinet. I spoke slowly, clearly, and only when it was my turn. I'm not here to fight HOA systems, I said. I'm here because someone tried to erase what wasn't theirs to touch. This isn't about condos. It's about the idea that silence equals surrender. And I didn't surrender. There was no applause, but there was respect. You could feel it in the silence. Afterward, a woman came up to me, mid-50s, sharp eyes, firm handshake. My name's Sharon Rivera, she said. I've lived in Wilton Ridge since 2002. I'm running for HOA president next election. And if I win, I'd like you to advise us. I stared at her. You want me on the board? She smiled. No, I want you beside it. Someone who understands boundaries and how to protect them. I told her I'd think about it, because truthfully, I wasn't sure I wanted anything more to do with HOA politics. But it was a sign that change might be possible. That the rubble left behind wasn't just destruction, but the foundation for something better. The following week, the abandoned construction materials were removed. The sign at the corner that once read "Condos Coming Soon" was taken down. In its place, someone had hammered a hand-painted plank into the earth. It read, "Respect the land. Respect each other." I didn't put it there, but I left it up because for the first time in a long while, it felt like the neighborhood was listening. The soil was angry. That's the first thing I noticed as I sank my hands into it dry, where it should have been damp, crusted, and cracked, in places silty in others. Months earlier, this land had been steady and alive under my boots. It had been humming with rhythm and memory. Now it was confused. It didn't know what season it was anymore. The machinery had torn through it like the skin of something sacred, mixing layers that took decades to form. It wasn't just dirt. It was history. And now it was scarred. So I began the long, slow work of restoration. I started by mapping out a grid, marking every damaged patch with colored flags, yellow for compacted zones, red for chemical runoff, blue for invasive species. Then I borrowed a small cultivator from an old friend down the road and turned the soil gently layer by layer, like unlearning a trauma. It felt more like surgery than farming. Every night I went to bed sore. Every morning I woke up before the sun and started again. And I wasn't alone. By now, word had spread beyond Wilton Ridge. Students from the university returned every weekend, notebooks in hand, some volunteering to help, others just watching, listening, learning. They came with questions about land rights, water tables, native plant restoration, and how to rebuild something that had been violated. I didn't always have the answers, but I had the willingness to try. One afternoon, a high school teacher from Langston brought her senior class to walk the property. "This is what civic courage looks like," she said to them. "This is what it means to stand your ground." The kids nodded, mostly silent. A few asked about the badge. One boy, no older than 17, lingered behind and asked, "Do you ever regret going public?" I thought about that for a moment, then said, "I regret what they did." Not that I answered it. Later that week, Terry called with an update. Federal review's nearly done. The HOA board's being dissolved temporarily pending reorganization. Southside's looking at possible class action suits, and guess what? They traced the forged deed to a notary firm in Las Vegas. Whole operations under investigation now across 3 states. Think they'll see jail time, maybe. But even if they don't, their game's over. I didn't celebrate. Instead, I went out back and planted something. A new pecan tree right where the bulldozer had first broken ground. It wasn't symbolic for anyone else. It wasn't performative. I just needed something alive to reclaim that space. A few days later, Sharon Rivera returned. She'd won the interim HOA election in a landslide. "Clean slate," she said. "Full transparency." She didn't come with documents or demands, just a hand extended in respect. "I'm not here to apologize for what they did," she told me. "But I am here to promise it won't happen again. And I'd like your help rebuilding trust." I thought about it. Thought about the porch light I'd left off for weeks, the quiet dinners alone, the fence line, where someone had once scrawled "traitor" in chalk only for the rain to wash it away. Then I nodded. "I won't serve," I said. "But I'll advise." And I did. Sharon opened the books, held community listening sessions, invited county zoning officials to give talks. Even started a land and legacy subcommittee made up of both HOA members and independent residents. For the first time, people who'd once shouted across fences were talking. I told them about soil erosion and stormwater flow. They told me about playground grants and safety patrols. Somewhere in the middle, we found common ground. One crisp morning in early spring, I received a padded envelope in the mail. No return address, just a wax seal with a federal eagle pressed into it. Inside, an official letter stating that my land had been reviewed, surveyed, and now formally reclassified as a protected agricultural heritage parcel under the Land Legacy Act. That meant no future annexation, no rezoning, no HOA claim, no bulldozer would ever touch it again. I sat on the porch for a long time, the paper in my hands, Lucky resting his head on my boots. Then I looked out over the field. The ryegrass had taken root. The cottonwoods were still standing. The scars were still visible, but healing. Later that day, I installed a new sign near the edge of the gravel road. It didn't say private property. It didn't say no trespassing. It read, "This land remembers." People stopped to read it. Some nodded quietly and moved on. Others asked questions. I told them stories. Stories about my mother's voice, my grandfather's hands, the way the land spoke in silence if you knew how to listen. The condos were gone. The battle was over. But the land, it remained. And now, finally, it was mine again. The season turned, and with it came something I hadn't felt in a long time, a peace. Not the kind you find in quiet moments, but the kind that grows deep roots. The kind earned through fire and rain and persistence. The kind that doesn't ask for applause. It just exists. The field was green again. What had once been a graveyard of construction debris and violated soil had become a living classroom. Wildflowers bloomed along the edges. New growth peeked from furrows I dug with my own hands. Earthworms returned to the topsoil. The land had remembered how to breathe. So had I. It was Dr. Bell who first suggested the idea. She called it an ecological learning site. Said the university had a small grant to partner with landowners who were restoring damaged zones after industrial or unlawful impact. You already did the work, she said. Why not open it up to those who want to learn from it? At first, I was hesitant, letting strangers walk the land after everything. After the invasion, the betrayal, the forged papers, the cameras, the flashbacks. But then I stood in the cottonwood grove again, hand resting on the bark, and I realized something important. This land wasn't just for me. It was for everyone who had ever been told to stay silent. Everyone who had been pushed off their rightful ground. Everyone who had been underestimated, so I said yes. We started small. A single Saturday event restoring what was taken, a walk through reclaimed earth. 30 people showed up, half of them students, the rest a mix of curious residents, environmental advocates, and local families. I led the group myself, boots covered in dirt, notes scribbled on index cards. I told them about the soil layers, the root systems, the hydrology scars, the cover crops, and the slow work of healing damaged land. But I also told them the story, the real story, of how the field had almost disappeared under concrete, how a forged signature nearly erased 3 generations of history, how HOA power, when unchecked, can become indistinguishable from tyranny. They listened, really listened, aha. And they asked questions not just about soil composition, but about legal boundaries, land rights, community governance. That's when I realized something else. This wasn't just a restoration site. It was a storybook. Every ridge and rut told a chapter. Every seedling was a line of poetry. And I was the reluctant narrator who'd finally found his voice. The university came back with more students, then sent a film crew to document the process. They called it From Dirt to Legacy. The video went semi-viral, in local circles, picked up by state educators, and even featured on a regional environmental podcast. I didn't do interviews, but I answered every email. I opened a P.O. box in town just to handle the letters that started coming in, dozens of them, then hundreds. People from across the country, many from HOA communities, sharing stories of intimidation, overreach, even land theft. Some were elderly, some young couples, a few veterans like me, who never thought their biggest fight would be with a neighborhood board. One letter stood out. It was from a woman in Arizona. She wrote, "My husband passed 3 years ago. The HOA tried to evict me for keeping his garden, said it violated aesthetic standards. I fought it, alone, lost. Then I saw your story. I want you to know I stood back up. Thank you for reminding me that dignity doesn't come from permission." I cried reading that one. Not the silent kind, either. I wept into my hands on the back steps while Lucky leaned against me like a stone wall. Because somehow, without meaning to, the land had done more than heal. It had started something. Sharon Rivera invited me back to another HOA meeting, this time as a guest speaker. I walked into the same room where they once tried to strip me of everything and found it transformed. The new board was younger, more diverse. There was a mural on the back wall, now painted by local students. It showed rolling hills, blue skies, and in the center a figure planting a sapling in freshly turned earth. They called it the Keeper. I stood before them, took a breath, and said, I didn't come here to make enemies. I came here to protect something that was already mine. But in doing that, I learned this: we all live on borrowed land. What matters is how we treat it and each other before it passes on to someone else. There was silence, then applause. But more importantly, there was understanding. In the weeks that followed, the HOA passed new transparency rules. They added term limits. They established a land use review board, independent, with rotating residents, and created a community mediation panel to address disputes without threats or fines. It wasn't perfect, but it was better, and it was honest. That spring, I opened the field full-time as the Wilton Ridge Land Heritage Center. School buses pulled up every Thursday. Teachers walked students through rows of native plants. Families came for weekend workshops on composting and stewardship. Even old skeptics like Mr. Halverson, who once called me a troublemaker, stopped by with his granddaughter to donate mulch. The scars were still there. The damage didn't disappear. But something stronger grew in its place: legacy. One morning, I walked the eastern trail as the sun rose. The air smelled like clover and fresh soil. The pecan tree I'd planted at the heart of the field was now taller than I was, leaves rustling in the wind like laughter. I stopped beside it and laid my hand on its trunk. "My mother would have loved this," I whispered. "She always said trees remember better than people." I stayed there a while, and when I turned to go, I looked out over the land one more time, the ridges, the shadows, the soft shimmer of dew on the grass. They built a condo once, or tried to. They thought they could pave over memory, erase roots, but they were wrong. Because this land wasn't just property, it was a promise, and I kept it.